and it was really cool. I just remember that as a kid that got my attention. But I'm so fortunate, the one that
Danny Koker has been declared dead, broke, and even behind bars. But it's all fabricated. His hit show ended with no explanation. His rock bar of 16 years was closed for good. And the rumors that he's finished just keep getting louder. So what's going on behind the scenes? And is there anything left of what Danny built after all? Join us as we break down why things aren't looking good for Danny Koker lately. When Counting Cars simply vanished. Counting Cars didn't end in a way that gave anyone closure. Season 10 premiered on September 15th, 2021, running its episodes through to December 1st of that year, and then disappeared from the History Channel schedule. The History Channel made no public announcement that the show had been canceled, leaving a silence into which poured years of speculation, rumor, and online mythology that grew further and further away from the reality of what had actually happened. In its earlier seasons, Counting Cars was attracting close to 3 million viewers at its peak, a number that comfortably placed it among the History Channel's most reliable performers. By the later seasons, that viewership had dropped significantly, and as the numbers declined, the economics of the show became harder and harder to justify. It is genuinely expensive to restore and customize rare classic cars for television, with some episode builds costing tens of thousands of dollars in parts alone before the cameras were even switched on. And the cost-benefit calculation that makes sense when 3 million people are watching looks very different when that number has contracted by a meaningful margin. The History Channel was also shifting its programming slate toward content with stronger growth potential, and a show that had already peaked was a harder investment to defend against newer formats competing for the same budget, especially when the numbers made it difficult to argue that another season would reverse the trajectory. The timing adds another layer of complexity that is easy to miss. Season 10 aired in the second half of 2021, when the entire television industry was still working through the unsettled aftermath of the pandemic, adapting to dramatically changed audience habits and production conditions that had disrupted nearly every long-running unscripted series on American television. Set operations were hampered by social distancing requirements, production schedules were compressed or interrupted, and networks across the board were making tough calls on which returning shows were worth the logistical headaches of continuing to make them. And with a combination of declining ratings and rising per-episode costs, Counting Cars was not well positioned to survive that particular reckoning. The legal troubles that had accumulated during the show's run did not help matters either. A couple who hired Counts Customs to restore their car in 2014 and allowed the crew to work on it with the understanding it would appear in an episode of Counting Cars, sued the shop when the car was never featured, and they allegedly never got a refund. That lawsuit settled out of court, costing the business money and resulting in press coverage that was negative. Frontiera, who was a former employee of Counts Customs, also allegedly failed to pay the company's taxes on time, which resulted in an IRS penalty of about $18,000. Frontiera also allegedly created rubber stamp copies of the signatures of Danny and shop manager Kevin Mack to authorize the fraudulent transactions. The legal battle dragged on for years in the courts, drawing a lot of media attention, putting the business under pressure, and adding internal chaos to an operation that depended on the public perception of a close-knit, trustworthy team. By the time the smoke cleared those accumulated costs, and reputational complications had added to the pressure that had been bearing down on the show. And the gap between what was really happening and what people were saying online had repercussions that extended far beyond Danny's television career. The rumors that refused to die. In the years following the end of Counting Cars on the History Channel schedule, Danny became the target of a sustained and quite remarkably nasty campaign of deliberate online misinformation that accused him with things that had no basis in documented reality. The rumors spread across social media, YouTube channels, and tabloid-adjacent websites, following a pattern that has become familiar in the age of algorithmic content, which is, the more extreme the claim, the more engagement it will generate. And the more engagement it generated, the wider it will spread. Some accounts claimed Danny had been arrested and sentenced to prison, while others insisted he was fighting terminal cancer and had disappeared from the public spotlight because he was dying. And still others claimed he had lost everything in some financial collapse and that Count's Customs had closed its doors for good. A separate wave of misinformation linked his image to CBD oil promotions and financial scam ads that spread on Facebook, using his name and likeness without authorization to give legitimacy to products he was not involved with. It was all fake, and with the number of allegations, there were no arrest records, no criminal charges filed against Danny, and no court documentation anywhere of any kind of sentencing or conviction of any sort. There was no medical basis to any of the public statements confirming the cancer, and Count's Customs remained open the entire time, taking on new projects and remaining a working custom shop and tourist attraction where fans could come and watch the builds going on. But the misinformation was large enough and persistent enough that it was the first thing many people encountered when they searched for Danny online. And correcting a false narrative at that scale requires either a sustained public response or the kinds of institutional support that an independent business owner operating without a network behind him does not easily have access to. Danny chose a different approach. He largely declined to comment on the rumors directly, which made sense from a legal standpoint and from the standpoint of not wanting to give false claims more oxygen by engaging with them publicly, but which meant that the narrative could persist unchallenged and without a competing story to push back against it. The silence that had followed the end of Counting Cars carried over into the post-show, and in that silence, the rumor ecosystem thrived. It was the kind of situation where the most rational response, which was to say nothing and let the noise pass, also happened to be the response that made things worse in the short term, because people who searched for information and found only uncontested misinformation had no reason to doubt what they were reading. The irony is that the real story of what Danny was going through in this period was entirely legitimate and would have made for great television on its own merits. A business adjusting to the loss of its primary platform, a beloved institution buckling under the growing pressures of the Las Vegas entertainment market, and a man trying to figure out what comes next after a decade of being one of the most recognizable faces on cable TV. And then, in June 2025, the rumor ecosystem got the headline it had been waiting for: the rock bar that closed and why it mattered. Of all the developments that fed the narrative that things were going wrong for Danny, the closure of Count's Vamped Rock Bar and Grill in June 2025 hit the public conversation the hardest. And it hit that way partly because of what the venue had represented over its 16-year existence. Vamped had opened in 2009 with Danny and his wife Corey taking over a space that had previously operated as Feel Goods, a venue that had originally included Mötley Crüe frontman Vince Neil among its partners. They changed the name, reinvented the identity, with an aesthetic that deliberately reflected the spirit of the Sunset Strip in its heyday during the 1980s, and created something that Las Vegas's rock community had never quite had before: a dedicated, independent live music venue outside the casino system, and a real community hub for musicians, fans, and the kind of people who took their rock and roll seriously. The 6,000-square-foot space at 6750 West Sahara Avenue, about 4.5 miles from the Strip, hosted an incredible lineup of artists during its run, becoming the place where the Las Vegas rock scene gathered much as the Rainbow Bar and Grill had done for decades in Los Angeles. In May 2025, Danny listed the property up for sale for $4.3 million and announced that the final night of operations would be June 28th of that year. His wife, Corey, had been the entertainment director and the driving force behind the venue's day-to-day operations and booking strategy. She was candid about the reason, in a way most business closure announcements tend not to be. Things didn't work out there with prospective new partners, she said, and the harsh truth had forced a decision neither of them had wanted to make. The music community responded immediately and emotionally. Former Skid Row singer Sebastian Bach said the closure left a huge black hole in the middle of Las Vegas, and musician Todd Kerns, who had played the venue countless times, said it was the epicenter of rock and roll in Vegas since the day it opened. For a venue that had never operated inside the casino system or benefited from corporate backing, that kind of reaction said everything about what it had actually meant to the people who used it. The last few weeks were handled with a dignity and a generosity that said something about how Danny and Corey had always run the place. They didn't just lock the doors, they put on a farewell series sponsored by businessman Chuck Brennan, bringing in Faster Pussycat, members of Rat, Night Ranger, Loverboy, and Danny's own band, Counts 77, for the final night on June 28th. Counts 77 played the closing set. Danny had a moment on stage where he paused to address the crowd with visible emotion before the final songs. And confetti rained down as the doors closed for the last time on June 29th, 2025, bringing 16 years of Las Vegas rock history to an end in the only way a place like that deserved. For the online rumor ecosystem, the closure was taken as proof of what it had been saying for years, which is that Danny was finished, the empire had collapsed, and that the count was done. The reality was far more complex and far less deadly than that framing suggested. To operate a 6,000 square foot independent rock venue in Las Vegas for 16 years is, by any reasonable measure, a remarkable achievement in an industry where venues of that description fail constantly, and where to compete with the financial might of casino-backed entertainment requires a mix of genuine passion and exhausting commitment. Danny had done the math that 16 years was enough, that someone else needed to carry that particular load, and that the failure of the partnership he'd been exploring to keep the venue going had ultimately forced a decision that neither he nor Corey had wanted to make, but could no longer avoid. That's a businessman making a tough decision, not a man whose empire is falling apart. But the difference was lost on the corners of the internet that had already made up their minds about where this story was headed. What was actually still standing? While the online noise was busy writing Danny's professional obituary, the actual business infrastructure that he had spent 3 decades building was still operating, taking on new work, and showing up at the events that the automotive world runs on. Counts Customs remained open throughout the peak of the rumors. The shop's website still promoted free museum tours every day, and the company's social media showed new build projects, with fabrication work and restorations in progress, and the kind of detail-oriented craftsmanship that had made the show worth watching in the first place, with no indication that the pace of work had slowed. In November 2025, Danny and his team attended SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Market Association's annual trade show in Las Vegas, the largest gathering in the automotive industry, and an event that no serious player in the custom car world misses. The photographs and content from that appearance made clear that Counts Customs was not functioning as a ghost of itself, but as a functioning, active shop that was still connected to the culture it had always been part of. The charitable work also continued and was an aspect of Danny's public life, which the rumor ecosystem had completely missed. In February 2025, he handed over a restored 1978 Lincoln Continental that his team had worked on to Steven Tyler's Janie's Fund, a charity set up by the Aerosmith frontman to help survivors of childhood abuse and neglect. And the car sold at auction for $300,000. The following year, early 2026, he donated a 1962 Cadillac Coupe de Ville to the same cause, a pattern of using his restoration skills and the value they generate to raise meaningful sums for a charity that had nothing to do with his television profile or his business interests. This was not the action of a man who had lost his purpose or his resources, but of a man who had determined to put what he had built in the service of something that mattered. His band, Counts 77, also kept playing live shows throughout the whole period. The band, which was rooted in the 1970s hard rock and territory covered by Black Sabbath, The Doors, and the greater canon of that time, was always as much a labor of love as a commercial venture, and the loss of Vamped as a home venue did not end the music. Danny had grown up performing on stage before he was old enough to drive. And the instinct to be in front of an audience is not something a business closure switches off. The biggest indicator that Danny was actively influencing what came next, rather than retreating from it, came on March 31st, 2026, when he launched Counts Culture, a podcast and video series produced out of a studio built inside Counts Customs and distributed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, and every major platform simultaneously. It wasn't a low-budget stopgap, but a properly produced operation with a clear format and a guest roster that immediately established it as something people in the relevant worlds would take seriously. The show, which was produced with the involvement of Sean Witt, who had served as executive producer on Counting Cars, guests on the first season included rock journalist Eddie Trunk, MMA fighter Randy Couture, Kiss guitarist Bruce Kulick, Jackal frontman Jesse James Dupree, and custom car builder Steve Darnell, along with the return of Counting Cars cast members Horny Mike and Ghetto Bob. It's a detail worth noting that ITV America is the producing company behind Counts Culture, because that separates what Danny launched in March 2026 from the kind of bedroom podcast operation that someone puts together when the mainstream doors have closed on them. ITV America is a major unscripted production company that produces a lot of network and streaming shows, and their decision to sign on to this project was a vote of confidence in Danny's commercial viability at a time when the rumor ecosystem had been insisting for years that he didn't have any. New episodes air Tuesdays, and the conversational format, which put Danny on leather couches in the garage with his guests instead of behind a desk in a studio, had the same effortless energy that made Counting Cars watchable in the first place. The closure of Vamped was the big topic of discussion, but there was another part of the Counts brand that no one seemed to notice was still open, and had been open without interruption through the whole time the internet was busy claiming that the empire finished. The business the rumors forgot to mention. Counts Tattoo Company, located inside the Rio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, stayed open during the peak of the rumors, with artists working in styles ranging from portraiture to American traditional. It was no vanity project. The parlor made its identity on providing more range and creative latitude than what tourists usually found on the Strip, and it kept booking appointments and putting new work on people without interruption. Counts Customs was always more than just a shop. It was a custom build operation, a museum, a tattoo company, a recording studio, a rock band, and a bar, all under the same brand umbrella. The loss of Vamped was a contraction and not a collapse. The difference between collapse and adjustment is whether what is left over still works, and in Danny's case, it did. The tattoo shop wasn't ever going to get the kind of coverage a rock bar with a 16-year history got on its closing night. But it stayed open it kept its artists employed, and it kept producing the thing it was built to produce, which is exactly the kind of continuity that goes undetected in an information environment that rewards the loudest version of every story. Do you think any of these rumors would have taken hold if Danny had just spoken up years ago? And now that he's the one holding the mic with Counts Culture, what do you think he'll finally say? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.